So a few weeks ago, the New York Times put out an article talking about how, like, hey, this is how the Sinaloa cartel creates fentanyl. And they sent their, it's two reporters that go in and they were side by side in some house on a kitchen stove following these two young cartel members that were bandanaed up and masked up, cooking fentanyl on a stovetop. Talking about how, yeah, we have a high tolerance level, but this is how we make it here in the lab, blah, 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 whoop, whoop, whatever. Now, Claudia Shienbaum was asked about this report, and she basically said, we're pulling up with the experts to answer your questions about this. And this week, she pulled up with a chemist and a doctor. And the doctor comes on and he says, first of all, fentanyl is insanely powerful. You only need like 4 to 5 grains of salt, like salt worth of fentanyl to like knock you out for a while, right? It's already dangerous levels that'll take you out. So it seems next to impossible for us to believe that this report from the New York Times is how they claim fentanyl's being made, when we know that those small doses are what will knock you out, because these fucking nerds aren't even wearing the right protection. They got a bandana on. Fentanyl will knock you out. And then the chemist comes on and he's like, yeah. The doctor is 100% on point, because to make fentanyl, you need a laboratory level of conditions. And you need to be wearing special suits, because if it gets on your skin or if you inhale it at all, it'll knock you out. And on top of that, you need like industrial levels of ventilation. And you can't just produce fentanyl in a fucking house. Like, you have to have a very controlled environment. And we just don't have, we've busted some fentanyl labs here in Mexico, but it's rare because they're not on every corner. They're in very specific places, right? So after that, Claudia comes on and she says, yeah, this is why we're calling bullshit on the New York Times article. And also at the same time, she reminded everybody, she's like, the same reporters that did this New York Times article are also the same reporters that accused the previous president of having ties with the narcos with zero evidence at all, which is hilarious, because if you know anything about Mexican politics, there is a laundry list of Mexican presidents that have connections to narcos and illicit activities and all kinds of shade fuck stuff, right? AMLO's not one of them. We've had 4 Mexican presidents that have been straight up CIA assets. AMLO's not one of them, right? So no evidence. And she said, she's like, yeah, this is also the same reporters that put out the article with zero evidence at all, saying that the cartels were taking biology students from the universities and forcing them to make fentanyl too, also with zero evidence at all of any of this too, right? So that was one part. And then the second part that I want to talk about is that this is why it's so important to do those daily press conference briefings, because when you come, and I'm mostly familiar with Central and South America, like if you take Chavez in Venezuela, one of the important things that he did right off the bat to be able to counteract the media, you have massive amounts of media that are going to try and discredit you and bombard you with propaganda, but more importantly, bombard US audiences and bombard other Central and South American countries with propaganda. And the one thing that he did is he was doing every Sunday, I think it was called Aló Presidente. So it was a weekly show, call-in show to everybody report. But that's a very common thing within leftist people that are holding power, is you want to have daily briefings, or you want to have regular briefings to keep everybody informed on what's going on. And that's where AMLO's strength really came in. And that's why he was able to fundamentally change the way that politics was talked about within Mexico, because he would bring on experts, just like Claudia is doing now. You bring on experts to address these issues. And not only are you able to go right at the source of a lot of the information right there and build up credibility within the audiences that you're speaking to regularly, but it's also easier to discredit and point out the bullshit that things like that articles like the New York Times are going to try and shove down your face, which is hilarious, because if any of us had been paying attention pre-October 7th, but definitely post-October 7th to Palestine-Israel conflict, like genocide, it's not a conflict, who are we kidding? But we know how much of a train wreck the New York Times has been in like clawing and scratching to defend Israel, right? So that is a super, super, super important point, because now you have something, I mean, the previous president, AMLO, became one of the biggest streamers in the world because of his daily press conferences. My mom watched him every morning. My dad watched him every morning. Any respectable Mexican watched the daily press briefings every morning. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, because it's clearly a move on behalf of the U.S. to try to start to build more reasons and excuses to attack and hack at Mexico using these media puff pieces, or not these media puff pieces, these media target pieces as evidence of why they should be involved in Mexico at all.